and welcome to Pine Island Research Monday night once again. Man, it seems like the week flies by Monday to Monday. I don't know why. It seems like it takes forever for the weekend to get here, and yet we finish a show and it's time to do another one. So appreciate everybody joining us in chat. We are live here on YouTube streaming. On the Untold Radio Network. We will be uploading the show to all the podcast platforms. iHeartRadio, iTunes, Spreaker, they're all hosts of the show. And we also welcome everybody who's listening in on that after the live. So if you ever want to be a part of this conversation, we have a pretty interactive show. We have a lot of people that show up and chat on YouTube while we're doing the show. And they ask questions and we try to involve that into the conversation. So if you listen on podcasts sometime, check it out. Untold Radio Network on YouTube. Subscribe. And every Monday night at 9 p.m. Eastern, you will find us here. You can jump in that chat and be a part of it too. We appreciate everybody who's picking their Monday, us as a way to spend their Monday night. We are humbled by your decision and appreciate having you here as part of the show. Pretty excited about tonight's show. I've got a friend, Bill Butcher, joining us. Bill is a wildlife photographer, does great, amazing work. Some of the photography that he does just blows me away. I wonder how you get that close. So some of the things we'll be talking about is maybe how he gets in the position to take these pictures of these animals, but also how challenging it can be, especially for somebody who's an amateur and maybe trying to do it under duress while having an experience of some sort, trying to photograph what they're seeing, probably not using the same level of equipment that he is. So that'll be an interesting kind of take from him on those types of challenges. Also, Bill is up here in northern Minnesota. Now, I believe he's in it is a neat area. He's that kind of focuses on Sasquatch and the subject as it pertains to the northern Minnesota area. There's a lot of people who contribute to that page, sharing their stories, sharing their encounters. And I thought it would be interesting for him to share some of the more memorable ones that he's read and learned about and maybe talk to these people. But it is pretty interesting place. There's a lot of remote areas up here. Of course, it's deemed the land of 10,000 lakes, and that is an underestimate. That's probably the low end of the number. If you don't like the lake you're on, if you don't like the fish you're catching, throw your pole over your shoulder and walk about a mile. You'll probably pass 2 more lakes on the way. It's crazy how much water is up here despite the remote forests that you will find in northern Minnesota. But I'll bring Bill in here.
Hi.
Bill, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. And you?
I'm great. Appreciate you taking the time to join us tonight.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Was I correct when I say you're from Osaka, Minnesota?
Osakis, yes. Mm-hmm.
Osakis.
Yes.
Yeah, that's one of those things where if you're from Des Moines or Des Moines, right?
Yes. I don't even know if we pronounce it right, to be honest with you.
Yeah. Well, there's there are, now that you bring it up, there are a lot of towns up here in northern Minnesota that have some tricky names to them, A lot of them derive their names from the Native American origins. Some of them are geographically referenced to lakes or rivers that run around the area. And some of them get pretty tricky to pronounce. But so you are, what got you into photography, Bill? How long have you been doing it?
Well, that's a long story. Well, it goes back to when I was as a kid, my grandparents gave me cameras and stuff, so I was always experimenting, taking pictures. And it wasn't until probably in my early 20s when I had a good friend of mine, my cousin. He got killed in a car accident. And it made me think about how we didn't have a lot of memories and stuff to share with people. So I got transferred up from Illinois to Minnesota. And once I got up here, my daughter started getting into school activities and sports and whatnot. And I wanted to make sure I captured memories of that. So I started doing photography. And in the process of doing that, I was watching some of the guys from the newspaper and on the sidelines talking to them. And I got to be friends with a guy named Arlen Anderson. And we got to talk and we became friends. And eventually he said, hey, I'm going to be retiring. He said, would you like to start shooting the sports for Osakis? And I said, wow, okay, that'd be cool. That'd be an honor. Well, anyhow, in the process of that friendship, he showed me, he said, hey, he called me over one time and he said, hey, I just won an award for a picture that I took. And he goes, I think you'd be pretty good at this and you'd be interested. And I said, well, what's that, Arlen? And he showed me a picture of a black bear that he had taken. And wow, I was blown away. I thought, wow, this is just the coolest thing. And he told me he got it from Vince Schulte Bear Sanctuary up there by Ora, Minnesota. And I'd never heard of that. Anyhow, he told me to go up there and check it out and how to get there. So I went up there and checked it out. And in the process of checking it out, I met some photographers there that were with National Geographic here in Minnesota. And I thought, what are you guys doing here, at this bear sanctuary in Minnesota? And one guy laughed at me and he says, you do realize photography is all about the light, right? And I said, yeah. And he says, and you can't get guaranteed where wildlife's going to be. And he says, we literally can spend months in Alaska or somewhere stalking bears or wolves or whatever they might be trying to photograph. And he goes, you may see them, but the weather isn't cooperating. The light's not cooperating. You're in deep woods, it's raining, snowing. He said, so a lot of times we'll come to a place like Vince Schulte because it's wild bears that come into you and you can photograph them with no risk and you can wait on the proper light and all that stuff. And that's kind of how I got introduced to the wildlife side of it. And I always spent a lot of time outdoors. I hunted and fished as a kid and always loved. I was one of those guys that would rather spend my days walking up and down a creek bank with a fishing pole or something than I did, doing other stuff. So anyhow, it really was up my alley to get into wildlife photography. And I started collecting cameras and lenses and experimenting and learning and reading and traveling around, seeing how everybody else was doing it. And it just became such a joy. And the other thing that I liked about it was when you hunt, and hunting is a lot of fun and stuff too, but you have a season and you're done. But with photography, I can go all year round. There is no season. And we do go hand in hand. So I'm really thankful for all our hunters and people that are sportsmen out there, because the state, the DNR, will buy property land for them to hunt on. And in turn, I can use the same stuff for photography. So it kind of went
9.5 months a year, you get to use it.
Yeah, exactly. And, worked out really well. And I've had a lot of fun doing it, and I've learned along the way. And an odd story, I was at a football game one time photographing my neighbor's son. He was a all-state wide receiver. And they were talking to me on the sidelines as I was taking pictures for the paper. And I'm trying to talk to them and trying to watch the game. And anyhow, I saw the corner of my eye, their son was lined up on my side of the field. And I knew by the way he was lined up and the way the quarterback was calling the play, they were coming to him. And here he started breaking down the sidelines. And it was funny because I didn't even break stride. I'm still talking to them, flipped up my camera, took the picture of him catching the ball. And he scored a touchdown, game-winning touchdown. And his mom goes, did you get that picture? And his dad's like, yeah, you couldn't have got that, could you? And I flipped up the back of my camera and I showed it to them. And they're like, oh, my God, that's tack sharp. And they said, how'd you do that? And I said, well, if I tell you the secret, I'd have to shoot you. And she laughed. And I said, seriously, I practiced shooting ducks in flight, taking off and landing. And that's how I got my speed for doing fast moving sports like football and basketball and stuff or softball or baseball, where you got to freeze that action. Anyhow, that picture, he sent it off somewhere and it won some contest. But yeah.
Wow. Timing's everything, right?
It is timing and light.
Well, it's interesting, the bear sanctuary that you mentioned, because I've seen a lot of footage that Abe Del Rio from the Minnesota Bigfoot Researchers has shared while he was visiting there. It is amazing how many
Yes.
bears are there. I mean, it's
Mhm.
crazy how many bears are in that area.
I don't know
So,
if your show ever delves into the paranormal stuff, but there's a cemetery on that sanctuary too. And what's really weird about that is I have had several people that have gone there, both professional photographers, amateur, just tourists, my own sister, take pictures, and they'll pick up orbs and like glowing shadow figures and mist back by that cemetery. It's unbelievable. And supposedly the rumor had it that's where Vince Schulte was buried, or he buried one of his favorite bears or something. But
wow.
yeah,
Yeah, we, for the most part, I mean, we kind of cover the nuts and bolts, tools, techs, and tactics of Sasquatch research and people sharing encounters. Although on the Untold network, there are several channels that really address different areas of the paranormal. And I've been doing some work. We're still working on a documentary called Blood Run, which is about 286 Indian burial mounds that have been here for thousands of years. It's amazing how far back these date, up until about 250, 300 years ago. So it's a big stretch of time that they were using these mounds. And there is a paranormal aspect to look at there, because there's a lot of weird stuff that happens, not just today in those areas, but throughout history. Some of the things that they've uncovered, some of the things they have a hard time explaining. It's pretty interesting. So, there's no doubt that we live in an area, especially when you start invoking some of the Native American history where they've been here for centuries upon centuries,
oh yeah, we have
but
quite a few of them in our group, and some of their stories are just fascinating, and their take on things is really interesting.
yeah.
For sure.
The Red Lake Reservation north of Bemidji, which is just south or just north of where I was researching a year and a half ago now, is really it's a large reservation. And Upper Red Lake and Lower Red Lake are really big lakes. There's two of the 10 biggest lakes in Minnesota. But it's a big reservation. It's been there. I mean, they've been in that area for a long time, and it's amazing the stories and the accounts that people share in those areas that have just been passed on generation to generation, and still being added to by those who are there now. And so when you hear them talking about it, it's not just telling stories that great grandpa used to tell. A lot of them are still experiencing things on the reservation still, but I've seen that in your group. Why don't you tell everybody how they find your group on Facebook? It's called
Minnesota Bigfoot Sightings.
Yeah, Minnesota
And
Bigfoot.
it's funny you should say that. I just had a lovely lady. I felt so bad. She commented on a topic that was going on, and I could tell it was very emotional for her. And she went on to say how her dad had passed away, and she wished that she had gotten the Bigfoot stories from him. And she was part of that reservation. And I felt so bad for her. I was like, oh my gosh, yeah, because she wanted to know what his take. They have a different outlook on it that's passed on from generation to generation. It was very interesting. But
yeah, no, it is interesting. One of the things that I had recently seen on the Facebook group was, I guess it's probably been about a week and a half. One of your members was talking about Hegman Lake. And I had seen pictures of these pictographs on Hegman Lake. Now, Hegman Lake is part of the Boundary Waters canoe area. We're talking, literally 1,400 lakes in it, like a 150 by maybe a 100-mile rectangle. You know, I mean, there's a lot of and when you see it on a map, the lakes are all just streaked. Like you can just see how they were formed almost just by looking at them on a map. But it's a lot of remote, very remote waterways. It's not utilized a lot, even though people will go to the Boundary Waters. There's outfitters there that will rent you canoes and set you up to go to these primitive sites. That it is very, very remote. And I'd never been to Hagman Lake. And I started looking at these pictographs. Now, what these Native Americans depicted centuries ago in these pictographs are not proof of Bigfoot, but they are intriguing in the stories that they were telling through these pictographs back then. And I'll pull one of them up just so that people can see what we're talking about. It is on there. I'll show you the setting and the cliff walls that they're on, but this is one of them. It depicts a bull moose, and then I don't know if this is a mountain lion. It appears to be kind of either a fox or a large cat in some way.
I thought it looked feline to me, and a lot of the members said they thought it was a cougar, and that's the only thing I could think of. I was thinking like you were fox or coyote or wolf, but they said it was streamlined and has cat ears. So
yeah, the fact that straight back and the length and thickness of the tail compared to like the thickness of the legs makes me feel like it could be a depiction of a cougar, or, a lynx or something like that. But you've got these are canoes that show two people in it. Here's a canoe, two people in it. Here's a canoe with one person in it. And then you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It looks like there may have been a faint seventh notch there, but maybe I'm wrong. It looks like a seventh notch. What those indicate, I don't know if it's days or whatever, but this picture is telling a story because there is an X up here that is marking, that is depicting a landmark or a reference point. So I don't, like you said, I don't know if they're talking about here's how many were in the party, here's how many days it took to get there, whatever. But when you see this here with these gigantic hands and this big barrel-shaped body, if they wanted to draw, there's a lot of pictographs that depict humans, and they don't depict themselves in this way at all in these pictographs. Whether or not they're drawing a bear standing on its back legs or whether or not they're drawing a reference to Bigfoot, I don't know. But it is very intriguing. And
I was contemplating a bear, but when I got to looking at it, they really do seem to enhance or really focusing on the chest area being so much broader than the waist. And most of your bears, they're pretty even.
There's no ass there. No. There's no bulky legs like you would see on a bear.
And them arms are like they're thinner. I don't know. I thought it was very interesting.
Here, I was gonna pull this up so that people could.
And it's funny because I'd never even heard. I didn't realize Minnesota had so many of these pictographs, but they have quite a few actually. The only ones I had ever heard of were from down by, I want to say it's down by Pipestone. There's a big one down there.
Pipestone, Minnesota.
Yeah,
there is a quarry in Pipestone, a big Pipestone quarry where they have a pageant every weekend, and there are pictographs on the Pipestone walls there. But to give you an idea, this lake is this stretch of this lake is fairly narrow, and these are the rock wall along one side. And water flow it does where my cursor is right now. It never really gets higher than this is fairly high at this point when the picture is taken. It might get a foot or two higher than that in the spring, but you can kind of see where this pictograph that I just shared is located on this wall. The person in your Facebook group most people that you can see the tip of this canoe, most people access this through the Boundary Water Trail. But the person in your group that was sharing pictures of it said that they cross-country skied to it. That from
Hmm.
one of the Boundary Water launches, if you went straight north of it, that you eventually, you could, he said you could easily ski there and back in a day. So I don't know if it took hours to get there or whatnot, but
They
but
made it sound relatively pretty easy to get to and pretty
yeah,
short. Just as it's off the top of my head. I can't remember what the one landing was they said, but if you're at the right landing, I thought they said 20 minutes to get across or an hour to get over there, and it's right there. They said you can't miss it, and yeah, they said the best time to go actually was when the
yeah.
lake was frozen and they
Here's
just
one of the
snowshoe or
other
ski.
pictures that are depicted there, and I don't. Again, this one gets pretty elaborate. I don't know what all they're drawing there, but just to give you an idea, they all kind of look the same, right? They all kind of have this
Mm-hmm.
red inked whatever they used, in understanding centuries old. That archaeologists have determined that these are centuries old, and that we're talking snow, ice, rain. They're still there. They don't wash off. So, and then what I interesting was, here's a pictograph in that's been talked about a lot, that is up in Alaska. Now, the what the question would be, what are we looking at here with these giant eyes? But the reason why I share this is Alaska, and they are apparently using that same iron-based whatever they're using to mark these walls. Seems similar. And again, we're talking about this picture here is, from what I understand, over 200 years old. Well over 200 years old. But this is really interesting as far as what are we looking at here? It almost looks like, if you, instead of thinking of this as a face, if you thought of this as like the butt plate on a knife, and then you see this, what appears to be a blade that goes down into something here. But it's easy to look at this and say we have two shoulders and we have a head with gigantic eyes of some sort. So really weird. But I would like to do more research into pictographs from around the country. That's not something that I've done a lot of, but what's Joe saying? Red ochre, Jeff? Is that what he's? Not sure if he's. This is my friend Joe. I was just on his show before we started this one, and had a great conversation. Joe's from Western New York Bigfoot Investigation Group. People can find him on YouTube and go subscribe to his channel. But I would imagine, if you really delve into this, that pictographs could be something that would be, I know they're prominent in Arizona and New Mexico, and Aztecs and Pueblo use them a lot on the rock walls that they not only used as a canvas for art, but carved out dwellings in. But anyways, I would really like to hear. Now, you were telling me when we talked about what really got you interested in this subject of Bigfoot, it kind of derived from stories that you were hearing from family.
Right.
Tell
Yep.
us a little bit about how that started. I mean, how old were you?
Oh boy, my uncle used to tell us stories back when I was, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years old, and he used to do a lot of hunting and fishing and stuff, and a lot of his experiences that he shared with us were also from when he was younger, when he was a kid too, and he had one situation where he was camping, and his something ended up running into his tent and knocking it down, and when he came running out of the tent, and him and his buddy came out of the tent and shined their flashlight to see what the heck was going on, they were thinking it was somebody goofing around with them, and instead they saw two really large orangish red eyes looking at them. And they were standing there staring at this thing. And they said, oh my God, whatever this is was, good head and shoulders taller than they were. And they said it would just stood there and looked at them for a really long time. Then it blinked and disappeared off into the forest. And the next day they saw, I think they found one or two large foot tracks. But he had a lot of interesting stories like that. And the area where we grew up wasn't very populated. They had a river and a creek there, and a lot of woods and a lot of state land. The state owned a lot of the land back in them days out there. So there wasn't a lot of homes per se in that area. So it was very interesting. But he had that. He had quite a few interesting stories. But I talked to a farmer one time. There was one, I want to say year, I suppose. I want to say it was in 1988 or 89, where they had a lot. It was, for some reason, that year had all these sightings, and different people were hearing things and howls and hearing footsteps in the woods. And it was a very active year. And that was the year that really kind of got me to thinking that there might be a lot or more to this. And it's odd, but I don't know if there's a correlation with Native American stuff, but there's also a burial mound in that same vicinity where all these things were happening. I don't know if they correlate together in some manner, but one of my friends were telling me they were watching a baseball game one afternoon, and they had their inside door open, so the screen door was there because it was pretty warm, and not many of us back in those days had air conditioning, so we had to old school it with the old window ventilation, so to speak. And they were sitting there watching Cubs game, I think it was, and my one buddy says, "What's that smell?" And he was giving the other guy a hard time. He thought, maybe he had passed gas or broke wind or something. And the guy says, "Well, that ain't me." And he goes, "Wow." He goes, "It smells like rotten, like a rotten wet dog odor. It was really strong." And they both could smell it. And they got up and they were like, it was coming from the front of the house. So they looked out, and it was just starting to kind of get dark. It hadn't fully settled in, but it was kind of that twilight time. And there's a street light across the street from their house. And whatever the odor was, they seen something coming out of the woods by their house, and it crossed the road into the woods on the other side of the house. And they caught a glimpse of it in the street light. And they didn't get a really good look at it, but they knew it was on two legs, and they said it was really big. They said it was 7 feet to 8 feet tall and very broad in the shoulders. And they had longer hair, and they described it as like a reddish brown hair. And they said it kind of paused right at the edge of the woods, and then it just kind of hesitated a little bit and a couple steps in the woods, and it was gone. And they were shocked by how fast it blended into the trees. And of course, it was starting to get dark. So, I mean, that the shadows add to it. But they were really surprised. And they said the way it moved was really weird because it had a fluidity that they couldn't explain to them. Like when you see a person move, they have kind of a certain way that we walk. It's not very
kind
fluid.
of a lanky.
Yeah, but these things move really fluid. Like it's an effortless, and it was a really quick movement. He described it as it moved quick, but it seemed like it was in slow motion, if that makes any sense. He said it had that kind of fluidity to it. And it was funny because right after that happened, they were different people out hiking and fishing and stuff were also having similar experiences where they were smelling something and they would hear something, or they would thought they saw something and they'd be looking in the woods and whatever it was would disappear. And they were like, they'd get scared and they'd leave. And that was when my uncle happened to have another experience. It was one of the things that he told us was they were walking along the creek and they heard something and he smelt that odor. And his wife looked at him and she goes, "What's that smell?" And he's like, "I don't know. It smelled kind of like a dying animal." And he said they came around the bend on the creek and they heard splashing in the water. And when he looked through the bushes, because it was kind of brushy, he said he saw a large figure in the water splashing up and down, and they all saw it. And they got scared and they didn't know what to do. So they slowly backed away. And his first thought was it was a bear, but it was standing on two legs, and Illinois doesn't have bears in that part of the state. So it kind of threw him. And he said, well, it's got to be a Sasquatch. The way it was built, it was so stocky. And it walked right across the creek and was gone. And about a week or two after that happened, Bobby Goodwin, one of the farmers up there, he was combining his field, and he was running the combine towards the creek. And it was starting to get dark, and he's up, he's been doing it all day. So he said he was kind of going along. He said all of a sudden he saw something stand up in the end of the cornfield. And you know how tall, corn's pretty tall.
Oh, yeah.
And whatever it was almost as tall as that corn. So it had to be 8 feet, or in that neighborhood. And it came out the end of the cornfield, and he saw it as clear as day. And he said it just scared the daylights out. It made the hair stand up on the back of his neck. He said whatever it was, it cleared that 50 foot or 70 foot or whatever it was from the end of the cornfield to the bank of the creek in no time at all. He said it's like 10 strides and it was across. And he said it went down that creek embankment. And he said he watched it, and he said it just disappeared down the embankment and was gone. And he said that he don't know what it was. But he said it was on two legs, and it was very big, and it moved very quick and very fluid.
That seems to be a common thread in the descriptives that you hear oftentimes in encounters, is the fluidity of the movement, or it just doesn't walk in that cumbersome way that humans do, that there is a flow to it. It doesn't have that up and down bobbing, So that's interesting that you hear those descriptors over and over. What do you think? And it kind of brings me to the question, when we start watching, like when people start talking about Bigfoot in Florida or in the Carolinas or whatever, I love hearing about their experiences, but I get so micro focused on the area that we're in, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that right now we got a pretty dang cold week coming on us? I mean, we're going to be wind chills of 30 to 40 below. We're kind of at the epicenter of this cold front that's hitting the whole entire Midwest and Northeast. Our actual temps are supposed to be in, I think the overnights are 11 below to 20 below this week. And the daytime highs don't really get above zero. I mean, they're right at around zero, but we're also expecting 35, 40 mile an hour winds with this. And they're talking about wind chills of -40 to -50 degrees in this area. On top of that, we've had some significant snowfall over the last couple of weeks to where it's all white. I mean, there are times where it's not Christmas and we're wondering if it's going to snow here in Minnesota. And yet this is not one of those years. So do you think that it is a little bit cyclic when it comes to reports, of what people are experiencing? Do you have 2 years where you get a lot of reports and then 1 year there isn't a lot? Or do you think it's pretty steady?
In Minnesota, it seems like it goes in kind of groups. Usually the fall tends to be kind of busy. And then if the winter's not, like you said, if the winter's not really super cold, but we have a little bit of snow, we'll get some reports then. In the summertime, I get reports in the summertime, but it's usually kind of different. The ones in the summertime are usually where it's seen crossing a roadway. A lot of tourists. I get a lot of tourists. They'll be on their way going up the North Shore, or they'll be going up to Jay Cook State Park, or you get people up by Crosby, Ironton, in that neck of the woods, or up by Orr, and they're just driving down the road and they'll see something. They'll go right across the road in front of them, and they're like, "What the heck was that?" And they know it's not a bear because it's on two legs, and it clears the road in 3 or 4 steps. It's all the way across the road. And then the other interesting thing is how fast they seem to disappear once they cross. And then that's amazing to me, because I had one guy that reported was a daytime sighting, and he was surprised at how fast it went into the woods and up a little hill and gone. He said they blend in so well into the shadows, and he even stopped to see if he could see what it was, and he said you couldn't see it. And but yeah, I would say so. It's sporadic. I think I don't know. I'm almost, the more I do this and I hear reports from all over the country, it almost makes it seem like they're I don't know the scientific term, but like a subspecies within the species or something, because they behave in similar fashions. But if you go like out west, it seems like they're a little bit more aggressive, and they're more aggressive down south. The coloring is even different depending on what kind of the country you go to. The sizes are even reported kind of different. So I'm wondering if there isn't a breakdown within the group, or maybe it's females versus males or juveniles. But that's what I find interesting too, is when people describe them, they're not always the same. It's a little bit different. Kind of like when you're looking at bears, there's a lot of similarities in your bears, but they're not all the same. They are slightly different.
Well, especially in coloration, but you see it also in the structure, the facial structure. Sometimes you can tell when one is undernourished and things like that. But you get black bears that are anywhere from blonde to cinnamon red auburn color. It's crazy, the coloration in black bears. But yeah,
and
no,
the personalities
I think that there are times in the winter where, obviously report numbers go down, but then also we're talking about a climate where there aren't as many people out there to have the encounters either.
I think that's the big part.
Mountain bikers, hikers, people canoeing, whatever, all summer long, backpackers, campers, and then you get to where it's 30 below wind chill and 2 feet of snow. You've got some snowmobilers out there who are making quite a bit of noise,
right?
And you've got some guys on the lake ice fishing who really aren't watching the shoreline at all. They're watching a hole in the ice. So I mean, I don't know how many people are really out there to have encounters this time of year. I think that could on its own attribute to the decline in the reports that you get, but I really don't believe that they migrate out of the area, and I only say that because in the spring, meaning like in late April, early May, at ice out, when all the snow melts, the water in the rivers are flowing, it seems like they're back right away. I mean, if they're going somewhere, it can't be far away, because these encounter reports are back, and it's there all the way up through November, hunting season. People are seeing them. So if they're gone that 4 months of the snow and the ice and the inhospitable stuff, I don't know where they could travel to that quickly and get back that quickly. That would be significantly different than here, because Iowa, there's still snow. It's still cold. I mean, you go south of here, you got to go a long way south to get out of those elements. So I think I would be quicker to say the plausible explanation is that there's simply less people out there to have these encounters.
I think they're still there. I agree with you 100%. I think they're still there. I think that they might not be as active. They might hunker down a little bit more, or maybe they do go to a more remoter area where they're not as apt to run into people as the cold. Because the more snow and the cold you get, it kind of pushes everything kind of even moose and all them kind of animals, it tends to congregate them to different areas that time of the year. But the thing, it's very interesting, because even like your bears, a bear really doesn't have to hibernate. It's not because of the cold why they do that. They do that because there's no food source for them. Most of the black bears are vegetarian berry eaters, and in the wintertime, there's not that there. So they stock up, and then they get they have their young during the winter time, so they do all that. But I mean, as far as being able to withstand the cold, they're more than capable of doing it. So I wish Bigfoot's the same way. But
when the forage space goes dormant, they go dormant. So,
right. And then it's a misconception. A lot of people say, oh, bears hibernate all year long. And that's not 100% true. I've seen reports out in Yellowstone and Glacier, and even here in Minnesota, where they'll see black bears in January and February. And that's because they used up their store of fat and they have to go back out. But
yeah. There are, I think that there are areas here that will deplete. I mean, first of all, I guess one of the things I wanted to mention was there is a hypothesis that could be drawn that if Bigfoot had a complex thought pattern and process like we do and was able to apply reason, and its number one goal was to simply be elusive and not be found, would be that you can tell when the barometer is dropping. Other animals sense when it's about to snow, when you're about to get hit hard, right?
Right. Yep.
And you know what the terrain is like is here. I mean, in the forest, big thatched layers of pine needles that it's not easy to leave indentions in. A lot of the lakes have river rocked or even hard shorelines to where it's not all sandy shoreline where you could leave an easy footprint in. You could travel around here without leaving sign that you were there by footprint. Snow, you're going to leave a footprint. Now, if they knew it was about to snow, you might have a foot of snow already. But if you could tell that it was going to significantly snow that night, you might go out hunting knowing that 6 hours from now, nobody's going to see a footprint from where you were at because there's 4, 5, 6 inches of new snow. So there could be a predictable survival method of being able to tell, I'm going to remain inactive. I might not eat for a couple of weeks, but when do we go more than 10 days in a row without a significant snowfall up here? You don't. They wait for those times, and perhaps right on the front side of those weather events, they go out and become active and hunt deer, or feed themselves, knowing that they aren't leaving their mark on the face of the earth, because 6 months or in 6 hours come morning, you aren't going to see anything that walked 6 hours ago. So
it's funny.
I often wondered if they did that.
The flip side to that is we get a lot of tracks or pictures of tracks sent to us in the wintertime. So that's when we get the vast majority of them is captured in the snow. And people always ask me, I get asked a lot whether or not Bigfoot's, a lot of people are skeptical or whatever. And they say, well, if it's real, how come we don't see it more often or whatever? And, I would say the reason that is I relate it kind of to when I was a kid and I would go hunting. When you're younger and you hunt, you go way out in the woods. You want to be off by yourself. You're really venturing. You're tracking. You got time, all the time in the world to go out all weekend and scout and whatever. Then when you get to be an adult, you got jobs, you got bills to pay, groceries. There's all kinds of stuff, and you hunt. And you might go hiking, you might go camping or biking or whatever. But predominantly, almost all of them activities are within a trail or within a small section of woods. It's like I have people ask me, well, where's a good place to go Bigfoot hunting? And I said, well, you could go to any park and do it because the majority of the people are in a very small area in that whole park. And I said, that's how come you can have bears and moose and all kinds of bigger animals within that park, is because there's not people right there. Even Yellowstone National Park is many people hit that every year. We're talking millions of people. There's still quite a bit of that park is virtually unexplored and untouched, because most people that go out there are lazy and they're going to stay in their car or on the trail or whatever, and they don't venture very far. And because people used to say that to me all the time in Minnesota. Well, I camp, I hunt, I never seen one. And I always say to them, well, how do you do your hunting? How do you do your camping? Well, I drive out and I go down the trail and I park. And I said, exactly. And I said, you have only a limited focus. And if there's something there and they know you're there and they're a little bit smarter than a deer, then your chances of them seeing you way before outweigh you seeing them first. And I just think that's got a lot to do with it. There's so much land out there that virtually is unexplored on a regular basis. But
you mentioned how we get a lot of reports of footprints and trackways this time of year in the snow. It's interesting how most of them are a trackway that's crossing a road, a trackway that's crossing a frozen creek, a trackway on a section of a frozen lake. People are driving when they see them. They're driving a UTV or a snow machine up a frozen river or across the lake, and they see these footprints. Or people are driving down the highway and they see them crossing the road after it snowed that night. You don't see a lot of pictures of them. We were 7 miles from the nearest highway out in these woods, and here's a track.
No.
It starts making you wonder how many one might find if they spent more time out in those areas, because the only ones that seem to be getting found are the ones that are convenient to find.
Right. And we're a faster paced society, because I've had a lot of people that even on your snowmobiles, your four-wheelers, even biking and walking, people do it at pace. They're always on the go, fast, fast, fast. And I've had people go right past trackways and not even know that they were there, or just assume they were deer or something else.
You get out on the snowmobile trails here. Guys are running their sleds at 80 miles an hour up and down the snowmobile trails. I often thought you could stick like a leg with a foot on it out of the snow and they'd fly right by it and not notice it, because they're doing 80 miles an hour from.
Or they might go, what's that? But they're already half a mile down the road.
I remember one time I got a new snowmobile. This is back in the day. It wasn't brand new. It was new to me. I had a 98 Polaris XC700. I had a boost bottle on it. This thing was a man killer with how fast it was. And I was told by the guy that I bought it from that it would do 128 miles an hour. I wish he wouldn't have. I wish he never would have told me that, because now I had to figure it out, right?
You had goals.
And one night we had just gotten 6 inches of fresh snow, and it was like 1 a.m. Just quit snowing. There was no wind. It was still. I went out and opened the garage, fired that thing up, and you could go right down the highway. The highway hadn't been plowed. It was just like right through 6 inches of powder down the highway. Ditches were full because it was late in the winter. But I got down to this lake, and got on this lake, and it's, just looks like a perfectly flat surface. I'm by myself. So this is stupid right out of the gate. Like, if I get injured or get in a crash, nobody's going to find me for another day, But I opened it up, and I'm flying so fast. Everything's going by me. I got my helmet on, but I'm trying to look at my speedometer and then look up at where I'm going. And that second it takes to look at your speedometer to just quick check your speed and look back up, you've already went like 100 yards.
Yeah.
I mean, stuff is flying by so fast at that speed. It's not like in a car. It's on a snowmobile. I suppose if there's folks that drive motorcycles that fast in chat, which I've never have, it's probably similar to that. But I'm flying on the snowmobile, and I see it hit 120 miles an hour. And out of my peripheral, I mean, it was like 2 feet from the right of my right ski, something blaze orange was there on the ice, and I was like, whoa. I hit the brakes, and I cruised back to it. Some guys had been fishing there and left an orange tip up.
Oh, geez. Yeah.
And when you drill it, for those in chat who don't know, when you drill a hole through like 1.5 feet, 2 feet of ice with an ice auger and pull it out, you'll have about an 8 to 12 inch tall domed slush pile around that hole, and it will refreeze. So it's literally like a boulder there now.
Yeah, you hit that.
If I would have hit that thing, I would have launched probably 30, 40 feet through the air, and there's no way you probably would have lived through it at that speed. So the whole way home, I'm like going slow. Like, I'm just like, my heart's racing. I get home and I called it was my wife's brother. He was a snowmobile freak. And I told him, hey, the new snowmobile I just got today, you aren't going to believe it. He goes, what? And I said, I hit 120 miles an hour on it. And my wife, the door flew up and she goes, you did what? I was like, oh man, I didn't think she heard me, but
that's so funny. My dad, this is not a Bigfoot story, but my dad took me out one day. I was 16 and he had a Harley Lowrider Super Glide 1200. And it was a drag special. That bike was, immaculate, full chrome, 9 yards. He takes me out and I rode motorcycles, rode dirt bikes all my life. And he goes, son, would you like to take her for a spin? I said, oh yeah, sure. Who wouldn't, right? Nice Harley. So I jump on there and we're out on DeZelm road, not far from where we live. And it's a straight road, perfectly straight. It was fairly new pavement. And he goes, go ahead, give her a spin, give her some gas, let's go. So I had it up, I'm cruising. He goes, you can go a little bit faster. So I started accelerating. Next thing you know, the telephone poles are going, shoo, 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 shoo.
yeah.
My dad taps me on the shoulder and he points down at the speedometer and it was 122 miles an hour. And he goes, I think you're trying to take flight. He goes, let off the throttle. So I let her off and I'm like, holy cow, that was one smooth bike. Oh, I don't think.
Well, you think about it though. You go that fast on a motorcycle or a snowmobile, and you hit a deer, or God forbid, up here you run into a 1,500-pound moose up here.
Oh, you'd be
you'd be in bad shape.
Yeah, I could tell you some stories, but
well, I know. I spent some time out in New Hampshire. My uncle used to live there and he managed the Mount Washington Hotel up by Bretton Woods or Bethlehem, New Hampshire in the White Mountains. And people up there, if you were to hit a moose with your car, you're just dead. They had such a high center of gravity, such long legs that when you hit one, they just cave in through the windshield. It's not like hitting a deer where it might go under the car or might deflect off. You hit a moose, you're pretty much dead if you hit it at highway speed. And that's scary stuff, man.
I was having my vehicle fixed and there was this elderly guy in there. He had to be close to 90 years old. And he was telling me a story about how him and his brother had bought a car and they had an old Volkswagen and his brother let him drive it. So he was cruising down the road. He hit a moose and he said the dang moose went completely over the car because it was curved, the Volkswagens went over the car, landed back on the road, slid across the road, got up, walked away. And he said he crushed in the whole trunk area of the car because the engine on those things was in the back. And he goes and parks it and didn't say anything to his brother, just left the keys in there and walked away.
Finding the trackway. Let me pull that up. This is a good point. This is how we hunt mountain lions out in the southern Black Hills, Custer, South Dakota, whatnot. Is we drive these fire roads on snowmobiles, and usually one of us will have a truck where they have the dogs kenneled in the back of this truck, but you find your mountain lion tracks crossing these roads after you've gotten an inch or two of fresh snow. Otherwise, you don't know how old the tracks are. You can't tell. But if it's snowing overnight, that morning, you've got to be out there looking for those tracks. Because when you find one and it's only a couple hours old, those dogs can cut that track down pretty quickly and tree a mountain lion pretty easily. But I also use that tactic when I'm archery hunting deer. If I'm still have a tag to fill this late in the year, being able to go to these areas, you look at any area and you've got an area where they're feeding, an area where they're getting water, and an area where they're bedding. So you got an A, B, and C, and you're trying to find those corridors that connect those dots. It's pretty dang easy to tell if they're being recently used if you've got some snow to go by. And it's crazy. I'll go out and throw corn out in the backyard now that my tags are filled. And I'll go out there the next night. I've got a game camera there. And there's like, I'll have on my camera 13, 15 deer there for hours. And you go, it looks like a demolition derby happened out in the snow in the backyard. It's all tore up. It's crazy how a little bit of snow will let you know if something's in the area. But
I use the same tactics when I do photography. You just go for a back road or a forest road or whatever. And whenever you got fresh snow, or even if it's a little wet and the gravel's wet, you can see that the print's really good, and just feel them. And if they're feel pretty fresh, and you scout out that area for your pictures and hope for the best, especially with the bears out west. Oh God.
yeah.
But, and Bigfoot, I think, might use the deer runs too. And that's also obscures their footprints a lot too, I think. But
I was going to share some pictures here. I shot a squirrel off the bird feeder the other day and threw it out in the snow in front of one of my game cameras. So I was really curious if I've done that before, and I'll get possum. Or, you wouldn't think of possums as meat eaters, but I've got game camera videos of a possum eating a squirrel, and so I thought, well, it'd be interesting. We have a ton of coyotes here. We get some wolves around here. Let's see what he's going to eat this squirrel. The next morning, I go out and grab the SD card and throw it in the computer and look. There's a red fox there. And I hadn't seen a red fox in forever right around the house here. But it was crazy. It's got this great, of course, when I say great pictures, as a game camera threshold goes, not as how you would take your picture, right? Two different creatures there but
photography's an art, I'll say.
Yeah. So do you mostly shoot your wildlife photography selling it to different media outlets and stuff, or do you actually make prints of it and sell them?
I usually do the prints and stuff. Sometimes I've had a few places reach out to me and stuff. And then I've donated a lot of pictures. I used to donate a lot of pictures here in town for the kids, for their sports and stuff. But I just try to sell them through word of mouth for now. I never really took it real serious until just recently. I had cancer a couple years ago and ended up getting put on disability and losing my job. So I do photography as kind of a sideline. I've won a few contests here and there. One of my bald eagle pictures got put in Washington, D.C. in the National Archives. They went and they took 2 eagle pictures from each of the 50 states, and they were doing a special commemorative event. And I don't know how they found my eagle picture, but somehow they found one of my eagle pictures, and the people contacted me and they were like, "Hey, we'd like to know if you'd let us use this for our thing." And I'm like, "Yeah, that'd be an honor." So I got to do that. That was pretty interesting. And a lot of newspapers. I've had a ton of newspapers get pictures from me for different things and stuff. And I have to say, my neighbor back in Illinois was also kind of got me into photography too. He passed away from cancer right before I moved up here. And his name was Rich Pulaski. And he had an interesting sideline. He worked for the fire department. Well, he had a full-time job, but he also volunteered for the fire department. And he'd go out on all their calls. Well, they were getting a lot of car accidents and house fires and stuff like that. And the insurance companies were wanting pictures of the accidents and the scenes. And back in them days, nobody was doing that. So he started taking pictures of all these accidents and fires and stuff for insurance purposes. And then he started working with the fire investigators going into the stuff and doing it. Well, one thing led to another, and he kind of built up a sideline business doing that. But his specialty was wildlife. And man, did he have some fascinating pictures. He had some raccoon pictures that he shot at night where he had just one shot in the camera before, he had film and it was before digital. He had one shot left to get it and he nailed it. It was one of the best raccoon pictures I'd ever seen. And that got me hooked. I was like, oh my God, I want to do this. This is fun. So,
well,
That's why all your
interesting.
Bigfoot pictures are so blurry all the time.
Well, that's what Caillou's going to ask you about here. Tristan, his name is Tristan. He wants to know, in Bill's opinion, what does he think is the best way to possibly take a video or a photo of a Sasquatch based on his photography experience and Bigfoot knowledge?
That's a loaded question. Because like if I'm doing it for like bear or something like that, there's different ways to do it. And you either drive around and look for the animal. Like I'll go out to Yellowstone National Park, or my daughter used to live out in Bozeman, so we'd go out there, and they've got quite a few bear there. And if you drive around the country roads long enough, you're going to come across them. And then once you do, I do all my looking at either early or late in the day, so the lighting's better because there's less shadows at that time of the day, and you get more pop out of your pictures. It's the golden hour, they call it. And that's when I go and try to get the pictures. Now, when you're doing pictures like for Bigfoot, you don't have that luxury because it's most of the time when you get those pictures, it's happenstance, which means you're just hiking along and all of a sudden you hear something, you turn around and there it is. So you don't have that ability to look for the right lighting and stuff like that. Like if I'm photographing a bear or a wolf or a moose or something like that, I look for areas in the woods where there's a clearing or something, and you kind of learn their habitat, their habits, not habitat. You got to know the habitat too, of course. But like if I see a moose, I'll kind of call him, or I'll get ahead of him and try to look for a spot ahead of where he's traveling where there's an opening. And once I see that opening, he doesn't realize I'm there yet, so I know he's going to keep coming. So I'll set up my tripod and my camera and get it all set up. So right when he gets in that opening where there's no shadows or anything, I can get the shot. And if, I'll usually take some before and after just because I like shooting. But typically the ones that are right in the middle are going to be the ones that are sellable or whatever. But now with Bigfoot, you can't get that. You can't. Yeah. You're not going to look for the light and stuff. And the other thing where people make a mistake is if you are out walking around. And this has happened to me before, so it happens to even the professionals. I'll have my camera set for one thing. Say I'm photographing a duck or a bird or something, or a grouse or pheasants or something. I'll have my camera set for that and the lighting for that situation. And then I'll be hiking along, and all of a sudden, here comes a black bear crossing the trail. And I'm like, oh my God, I got to get the shot. And I just flip up the camera and I shoot. Well, it's reflex, but I forgot to change my settings. Mm-hmm. So hopefully the settings are right, and I don't get a soft picture or dark picture, or I get something usable. And that's the key, is to have that camera set to the setting for the lighting that you're walking in. If you're on a hiking trail and you're walking along, meter the woods off to the side, and that'll give you an idea of what the meter's telling you to set your camera shutter and your aperture speed at. And I usually put my ISO and auto ISO and let the camera do the work, the heavy lifting there of changing that, because when you're shooting wildlife, it's very difficult to keep adjusting all that stuff on the fly as you're running along. Now, if I'm in a blind or something, I got a little more leeway to do it. Sure. But for Bigfoot, that's probably the biggest thing I see, is most people have their camera set to shoot too slow, or they have the ISO kicked way too up. So you're going to get a lot of noise, because when you're out in the woods, they don't realize how deep and dark the shadows are. Our human eye sees different than a camera. So our eye can make out the details and sees it good, but your camera sees everything in a middle gray environment, and it tends to see everything slightly darker than it actually is. So if you're looking at a deer and it's in the shadows and you can see it really good, you have to be cognizant of them shadows, so that you know to set the camera up a little higher on your eye. I'll plus my exposure a little bit to lift the shadows. And most people do them on their phone, so it's a whole different camera. Or your phone is that really limited to what it's gonna get. And then if you are out and you have your phone with you, and let's say you're hiking or you're camping or fishing, or maybe you're even in a car, and you do see a Bigfoot, the key thing that you can do, and this will work for anything, whether it's a bear or wolf, deer, or whatever, is to hold your camera against something, your phone against something, whether it's your steady it against something so that it doesn't move. Even though you have the image stabilizer on the camera set up, if you can prevent anything from moving, you're going to get a lot sharper image. And that's what I'll do. I'll put it on a bean bag. I'll lean it against my car window. I'll push it against the side of the car, or a tree for that matter. I'll lean it up against a tree, or to tuck your elbows into your side as tight as you can, and then put the camera right in front of you. That helps too. But the steadier you can hold it, the better you are.
You know, I think that, and correct me if I'm wrong, there's a lot of things that a photographer can accomplish in the editing. You know, what happens after
Right.
you've gotten the picture, right? With
Right.
Lightroom and all the different complex software that's out there. But even then, the product that you're starting with is going to determine what you're capable of. Meaning, if you have too much light in a picture, Lightroom's great at removing some of that light, being able to get back to that, darken it up and make it make sense. But if there's not enough light to start with, you can't create something that's not there from the beginning. You know what I mean?
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. Or you get noise. And that's another thing I see a lot. People will say, well, the Bigfoot picture's blurry. Well, a lot of times when I'm investigating, because I'll troubleshoot a lot of pictures, or I'll investigate them to try to see if I can see if it's a hoax or not, so to speak, and I'll analyze it. But a lot of times that what they consider blurry is actually noise in the image from having a phone trying to photograph in darker woods. Anything in the shadows is going to produce a lot of noise. And that's really hard to get rid of, especially on a cell phone picture. But yeah, Lightroom can lift up and do a lot. That's amazing what Photoshop and Lightroom can do. But if you don't get it right in camera, you're struggling. And there's ways to manipulate it. Like if I take a deer and I get the eyes really, really sharp, I can blow that deer up really nice. If I take the picture and I don't get the eyes very, very sharp, when you're looking at it, that's the first thing you notice. And that's the telltale sign if a picture's sharp or not, is the eyes. But if you can add in a lot of the environment around it and make the deer look like it's more in its environment, that blur to the eyes is less noticeable. But it's still there, but you camouflage it with the environment so that the person looking at the picture, your brain automatically knows that that's a deer. So you'll fill in those blanks. Where Bigfoot, you don't really have, nobody really has that knowledge of what it should look like to fill in the blanks if the picture's soft or whatever.
Sure.
I guess is kind of.
And it's not a subject. It's not a subject where you want to take creative control and start adding something to it that isn't there. You know.
No.
A good picture will be used to define a lot of, we learn so much from it. It better be natural as far as the thing that we're learning from, and not, contrived. I think you bring up an interesting thing that you mentioned about photographing wildlife is it sounds like you use a predictive nature to create opportunities. You see a moose moving in somewhere, let's get in front of it. Let's predetermine what the background is. Don't use those dark trees. There's a break there where you can see it's lit up behind it. There's backlighting to it, So you can control that situation to create that opportunity, so to speak. When you're talking about somebody trying to photograph Bigfoot, oftentimes, like you said, 5 seconds before anybody ever had an encounter, they didn't expect to have an encounter. It
No, they
like
don't.
you said, it's happenstance, right?
Yes.
And it's interesting because I saw a deal where a guy had done kind of a controlled experiment. He had 5 of his friends. He said, everybody open your phone up and get your camera ready. He says, we're going to go for a walk. And they were walking in a boardwalk area of, it looked like Maine or, some Boston maybe. But they were walking along this boardwalk. There was a lot of water. There was a lot of people, boats, a lot of color. It was midday. And he said, when I tell you to take a picture of something, I'm going to tell you where it is and I'm going to point at it, and you got 5 seconds. And they were walking along, and there would be like a sign at the end of a pier, wait, like 150 yards down away. And he'd say, there's a sign out there, take a picture of it now. And everybody grabbed their phone, they'd have 5 seconds. And when you took those images from a distance, it's like, well, I can tell it's a sign. But when you zoomed in on them, you couldn't see the letters, you couldn't see, and it was because they didn't stabilize it. And then what he would do is he took his iPhone in that same spot and he stabilized it and took the right picture, and he showed how it is even on a phone. We are capable of getting the pictures, but when you're operating under duress and you're only given a 5-second window, what you can come up with versus what you could come up with if you weren't under duress and took your time and stabilize it is 2 different things.
Absolutely. And everybody's different. I mean, for the most part, we're all similar in our reactions, but not everybody reacts the same way. Like, for example, I've been out and I've been around bears quite a bit, so I'm not quite as nervous around them as some people would be that's never been around them a lot, if you know that saying that way. But it's like when something happens really fast, I equate it to like if you're driving down the road and you're daydreaming and a cop all of a sudden pulls up behind you and he kicks his lights and sirens on. That split second, your heart rate picks up and you kind of tense the wheel and you're nervous or whatever. But like when it comes to wildlife or something like that, if you're not expecting it and it does happen, there's a lot of times even people that are professionals in that field won't get the shot because your adrenaline kicks up.
Yeah.
And when your adrenaline's kicked up or your fear kicks up or your excitement kicks up and you only have seconds, you spin around and the thing's gone before you know it. You're just trying to get a picture. It's a lot more difficult than you think. Like
that level of duress, I think, is just so overwhelming that
and people
controlling that adrenaline is almost impossible at some point.
It's happened to me before with wildlife, and I'm usually pretty good. I don't miss much unless I don't have my camera set up because I didn't change my settings. That's happened to me a time or two. But when I had my Bigfoot experience, the weird part about it for me was I had my phone with me and I don't know why I didn't pull it out and shoot, because I've seen bears, I've seen wolves, coyotes, you name it. And I'll always first thing I do is I stop, conceal myself, and then flip my camera out or my cell phone and try to get a picture. When I had my Bigfoot experience, I froze. I didn't do anything. And I still to this day don't know what happened or why, but it happened so quick. And by the time I realized I had my phone on me and I could film it, it was already gone and too late.
I think we try to prepare ourselves for those situations by saying, you try to control it, like you try to create almost like a psychological muscle memory of this is how I want to condition myself to react if I ever have this opportunity, right?
Yes.
But it's a lot like, excuse me, when I'm archery hunting, I'll trim branches out of the tree that my stand's in, trying to create shot lanes. I'll be looking at where that game trail is, and I'll think, okay, if it comes from that way, this is how I'm going to handle it. If it comes from this way, and then all of a sudden, you find yourself in a position where you're like, well, I didn't see that happening. I didn't expect that to happen like that, right? And I think that's what happened. You can't prepare yourself for that moment. You might think, hey, look, if it ever happens, I'm going to remain calm. I'm going to breathe deep breaths, keep myself controlled, keep my composure. I'm going to get my phone. I know exactly how to get everything accessed right, so I'm not going to be on the wrong whatever, fumbling, trying to find the camera. And even then, you find yourself in that moment and you're like, man, what happened? How did I drop the ball here, right? And Bigfoot, it isn't easy to go out and have, I know people want to simplify that idea, but it's not simple. Like he
No,
said, most people have an experience. They never plan on having an experience. The idea that I'm going to go out there and create a situation in which maybe will up my chances, and so I should be ready and expect it. I don't know how realistic that is, because if it ever actually does happen at some point, you probably aren't going to be ready for it. And two, um, I don't know if, I mean, almost every encounter you've heard of, how many of you heard where somebody said, "Well, I was going camping this weekend and I knew there was a good chance that I'd see a Bigfoot. So this is what
even the investigators aren't that lucky. Even us investigators don't get that lucky.
No, it isn't easy. It is like hitting the lottery. Maybe not all 6 numbers, but hitting 4 of them is hard, you know? So this idea that I'm gonna go out and have this experience, if I just keep at it, it'll happen. It's hard, but yet there are people all the time that we keep hearing people come forward. Happened last week, there was 4 more people that it happened to. This week, there'll be 6 more people that it will happen to, right? It's happening all over. It's just having it happen to somebody who's prepared and is capable of executing the whole process is, it's just hard. It's astronomical almost. Really.
And it's not easy. It's like the bear example I said earlier with Vince Schulte and the guys from National Geographic going there. The bulk of the bear pictures that you see for sale out there and stuff are generally what they call public bears, or bears that are habituated to people, or they're taken in those areas like Vince Schulte or Yellowstone, where the bears are used to people, and then you can take your time, get your camera right, your tripod right, and get it. But if I was just out in the woods and seen one, it's more difficult than people think. That's why you don't see a lot of them actually, of them in somebody's woods while they're out on a hike and they got the pictures.
There's so many pictures of grizzly bears holding a salmon in a creek, because in Alaska, there's several areas in which hundreds of people are sitting there during the salmon run waiting for the next bear to come up and pick up a salmon out of the river. I mean, it is a gigantic photo op, and a lot of people are aware of it. How many times do you see a grizzly bear scratching his back on a tree in a dense forest? Not many.
No.
Not many. Tristan asked, can Bill please share his encounter? Can you tell us a little bit about that time in which you...
Yeah, sure. About 4 or 5 years ago, it was right before I got sick, I was walking my dogs, and I had this routine where I'd go to work, and then at night when I got home from work, I'd take my dogs for a walk, and then I'd come home and eat dinner. And one night I was walking the dogs down the road. It had just snowed. The snow was about a little over knee deep, and we were going down the road and didn't notice anything. Went all the way down, did my normal loop, turned around and came back. And on my way back, my dogs started acting weird, and they were like really concentrating on the ditch line, and they'd slowed their pace down and were doing a lot of sniffing. So I looked over and I'm like, what the heck is that? It looked like footprints. And I thought, well, that's really strange. And I went over and looked at them, and it looked like giant 18-inch barefoot footprints. And they were 8 to 8.5 inches, depending on where you measured them. Across the ball of the foot, it was closer to 9 inches, but it narrowed at the heel. And I followed them out in the field a little bit, and I couldn't even walk out there because the snow was so deep. I couldn't make the stride that it was doing. And I measured, so I got all excited, and I took some pictures with my cell phone, and my dogs wouldn't even go out in the field. And so I ran home. I told the wife, I said, I seen some tracks down there. I got to get a tape measure. I got to check this out. There's something, I grabbed my tape measure, and it was starting to get dark. So I run back down there with my cell phone, and I'm trying to take pictures and use the flash on the cell phone. And I measured the stride length. It was, I think if my memory serves me, it was 32 inches from heel to toe, from one foot to the other. And these foot tracks measured 18 inches by about, like I said, eight inches in the back and closer to 9 up at the front. And I could clearly see the toes and stuff in the snow. Now, so I seen that, and it was really weird because it wasn't there when I walked back by the first time, but it was there the second time. These tracks went in single file, and went out into the field, and then it curved behind my neighbor's house and disappeared off into the swamp. Now, moose can do that. Moose can make that big stride, and they can also leave some really big tracks. And in snow, a moose will step track and track, so it can make a really big looking footprint.
Yeah.
And deer can do that too when they bound, and so can rabbits and stuff like that. But this wasn't a rabbit because it had defined toes, so I knew it wasn't a rabbit or a deer. I wasn't too sure about the moose because I'd never really, they had toes, and that kind of threw me. Anyhow, I had that experience, and a year or two went by, and I got cancer, and me and my dog for therapy and stuff, we would walk down to the woods at the end of the road where the swamp is. And one day we were walking through there, and we saw those same type of footprints. So I took pictures of them. And then one day I went for a walk with the dog. And the minute we came into the woods, and you got to cross a 90-acre field to get to the woods. And the woods is on a snowmobile trail. And it's kind of an interesting story, but my neighbor keeps that clear. He mows it in the summer, and he keeps it packed down in the wintertime so that we can walk on it. But anyhow, once you get into the woods, it turns into the snowmobile trail. Well, the minute I started entering the woods, I heard a knock, very distinctive tree knock. And I thought, what the heck? And my dog even stopped and looked. And I thought, well, this is weird. So I took out my phone and I tried to record the sounds. And what was weird about it was I could hear them pretty distinctive with my ear, but they do not pick up on a cell phone very well. And I didn't realize that until somebody told me that the microphones on those phones, you have to actually plug a microphone in to pick up any sound that's not right up next to you. But anyhow, so I started walking, and we're walking along like we normally did. And I'm thinking, what the heck made that knock? And right away I'm thinking, could it be a Bigfoot or something else happened? So I get around the corner, we go down the hill and around the corner, and we're walking along, and we heard a second knock. And this knock was further into the woods. So right away, my mind's thinking, and my dog heard that one too, and she stopped, and her ears perked up, and she's like, looking around. And I thought it almost seemed like they were communicating, like something was letting somebody know that, hey, somebody just entered. Okay. So I get this brainy idea. I go, I'm going to go off the trail. I'm going to cut through the snow, and I'm going to circumvent around. I'm going to go down and come up the little valley or whatever and try to see what's making that knock. And I had my cell phone out and was videoing it. And that's when I heard the third knock, and I picked that up on the cell phone, and it was closer to us. But what was weird about the third knock was as I was coming through the woods, and my dog was staying closer to me than she normally does. Normally she runs around and has a good time eating sticks and stuff, but this time she was kind of glued to my side. And I have an English Mastiff, so she weighs about 180 pounds. So she's a pretty good sized dog. So anyhow, we come up over the little hill, and the knock was off to our left. Well, once I come up over the hill, there's all these deer right there, a whole herd of deer. There's like 12, 15 does. And the funny thing was they all had their backs to me, and they couldn't even care less that I was there. I don't know how they didn't know I was there because we were making noise trudging through the snow.
Sure.
I'm looking at them, and they're sniffing the air and looking at in the area, the direction of the knock. So I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, they heard it too, and it got their attention. So I crept up. I got to within 15, 20 feet of these deer before they finally turned around and looked at me, looked in the direction of the knock, looked back at me and my dog, and the one deer sort of flagged her tail just a little bit, and they trotted off further into the woods. And I thought, wow, that is weird. And that's when I heard the third knock. And it was funny because the deer stopped when they heard the knock, and they all looked back in that direction.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't see anything. Got to the fourth knock, heard a fourth knock, still didn't see anything. And I thought, oh my God, it's getting dark. I'm getting out of here. So I went back home. Well, about maybe a month after that, back down there walking, I come in the woods. My dog runs down the hill like she normally does, goes around the corner, and she stopped. And when she stopped, she had this really strange look to her when she stopped. And I'm thinking, what the heck? I'm thinking, well, there must be a dog or a coyote or something over there, because the deer, she likes to watch the deer, but she doesn't really chase them or anything, just watches them. So as she went down the hill and around that corner and stopped, I'm walking along, not thinking anything about it. All of a sudden I heard a noise. I look off to my left and I'm like, oh shit, about, I don't know, maybe 50 feet into the woods. And it's pretty clear. It's not real brushy where this was at, but it's kind of got a ravine to it. Whatever it was like on the down in the ravine a little bit. So, but I could see its legs and stuff. But as it kept moving, it disappeared down into that ravine. But when I looked over, I'm like, holy crap. The only thing I could describe it as is it looked like what an orangutan would look like, as far as it had long, stringy hair, really long, stringy hair, and it had that reddish orange color like you see on a fox. And the skin underneath of the hair was like a darker color. It wasn't orange, but it was like a orangish black or orangish brown color. And it wasn't as muscle toned as all the Bigfoots that I'd heard about, but it was wider in the shoulders. It did not walk like an ape, but it had strong looking arms. You could see the muscle definition. And its face did not look ape like. It looked more like a human, but an older looking human with like skin like a monkey would have covered with hair, but it did not have a facial expression like a monkey. It looked at me, just real quick looked at me, and then it moved. And I mean, it was stooped forward, not on all fours, but it was stooped forward. So its upper body was leaning more at an angle, and its feet moved very fluid, very fast, and like it was in slow motion. And just in a few steps, it went down the ravine, around a tree, and I froze, and it was gone. And that was it. We smelt a slight musky smell when it went by. And I mean, I think my dog scared it, whatever it was, and it flew out of there. And I'd say the height was probably maybe a little bit taller. I'm 6 foot, so I'd say it was probably about 7 foot or so. But it was just blew me away. And then my dog didn't come back right away. The dog just froze. And I called her back, and then she came up the hill, and she had a look on her face like she didn't know what she's seen. And we looked around the woods, and whatever it was gone. I mean, we couldn't see it. I took my camera, and finally I got my camera out of my pocket, and I started filming to see if I could pick it up on video. Never picked up anything. But I don't know why I froze, and I don't know why I didn't grab my phone out earlier. But I can describe how it moved. It was just very fluid, and it lifted its, I don't know how to explain it, but like the knees lifted, the foot like lifted straight up and down. Like it purposely put the knee out forward when it landed, not like we walk where we're more straight legged. It had more of a picked up the knee and put the knee forward and down. And yeah, and it was very, very quick, very quick.
Almost like if you were walking in shallow water.
Right. Yes.
Like on rocks, you know.
Right.
That's
it was, and I haven't been back in the woods since, to be honest with you. I went back down there one time to take pictures, and I didn't even venture that far in there. The woods are always silent. It's really bizarre. Even my wife, I took her down there one time, and she said, "Oh my God, it's eerie in here. All the bird activity, and then you get in these woods, and it's dead quiet." And I said, "Yeah." I said, "Right." And sometimes you come down there, and it's all busy, woodpeckers, owls. It's real active. But on that particular day, you couldn't venture up.
I think it's interesting how the deer reacted, because you see that a lot, especially if you're a archery hunter. You eventually, when I have deer in front of me, it's hard to just get them to bolt off running. They always stop and look and try to figure out what they're running from.
Yeah,
like if I have even if I have a buck, a mature buck that's walking down a game trail, and he's walking, and I go whop, or whatever, they'll freeze in their tracks and they'll look at the direction it came from for about 4 or 5 seconds before they take off running. They just don't instinctively run away. It's like they have to figure out what they're running from, right?
Except for during rut, then they're gone.
Yeah. I mean, you get a small buck come through and a big buck, you do a snort wheezer. It's like, like that. A little buck don't have to look. He just knows I'm getting out of here. But no, it's interesting that those deer were especially since you had a dog with you, they're kind of tuned out to the fact that you're there because they're so laser focused on whatever they're perceiving this threat to be. But
They tolerate her pretty good. The deer do. I mean, if she gets so close, they take off running, and she just stands and watches them. And I think they don't perceive her as a threat. But in that particular situation, I was really surprised that they let us get that close without reacting right away. It just blew me away. And yeah, I don't know how to explain it, but then she did the slow tail wag, not the full, but just a really slow tail wag, and then they trotted up.
When that flag isn't straight up in the air, when they're just like, we don't need to be here anymore. And you're right, when you use trot, they kind of trot. They kind of high step it as they're moving away. But if you were to make a noise, they'll stop in their tracks and look back again, like what's going on. They're not in full alarm mode at that point. But
what was weird is they really didn't. And after they trotted away and they heard that other knock and they stopped to look at the other knock, they didn't even really pay attention to us that much then either. A few looked back at us, but they were more focused on what was making the racket. And then after they looked at the knock area for a little bit, then they trotted off further into the woods. And we seen them a little later on, but they were far away. But
so this isn't too far from your house, and you had mentioned you were kind of doing this as therapy, that time you'd spend out there with your dog, so it must not be too far away.
No, it's fairly close. And yeah, I'm surprised nobody else has had any sightings down there. They've seen tracks, but nobody's seen any, had any other experiences. But there was one not far from here where they thought they seen one, and one in Alec on one of the lakes. But yeah.
We've got about another 15 minutes here. I'm kind of curious what, out of all the different encounters that you've seen shared from the northern Minnesota area on your page, is there one that really stands out as being, pretty memorable? Is there one that is just like, wow?
Yeah. It's funny because I have to say, like, when you look at, like, you're looking at videos and you look at pictures on the internet, it's sad to say, but probably 85% of them are either hoaxes or misidentified. And usually I look at them kind of in an investigative manner, but I also look at them photographically. Like if they're taking a picture of a Bigfoot and the shadows don't line up with the trees, photographically speaking, then I know it's either been manipulated, edited. And that's the other sad thing. A lot of the videos that I get that are sent to me usually have already passed through somebody else's hands and they've attempted to edit it to clean it up, so to speak. But anytime you touch it, it's an edit. So you want to try to get that in its most raw form. But yeah, as far as memorable, wow. I did have that conservation gentleman from up north from the reservation had those tracks that they followed, and he followed them for quite a ways. And they had quite a few reports, people calling in about that, how they had, I don't know if anybody had actually seen anything, but they did see the tracks and called it in. And they were very interesting. I looked at those and you could definitely see toe prints. And I would have loved to have been able to gone up there and seen them or plaster cast them, which is kind of hard to do in the cold, but would have been neat to have tried it. But as far as like investigatively, most of the time when we get a report, and that was the other reason why I started the group, is I was trying to get more feedback from individuals from the Midwest, mostly Minnesota, but I'll take reports from Wisconsin, Iowa, Illinois, the Dakotas, or anywhere, but I focus mostly in Minnesota. But what I wanted to do is I wanted to build up and document these sightings to where you look for certain similarities, like the weather. Was there an odor? Was it at daytime, nighttime, raining, snowing? Did you have tracks, tree? Kind of get a compilation of all the stuff. Because the BFRO, as good as it may be, they're very laxed on their investigative end. They'll get a report, and then it won't be 4, 5, 6 months later till they go out and look. Well, by that time, the footprints are gone. Whatever evidence is gone. and if you're going to do it, you have to get there in a timely fashion. And that's the one thing that really kills the Bigfoot investigating, because it's not timely, because most of the reports don't come to you till way after the fact. So that's why I tried to get the group. I was hoping to get members on the group that would have a sighting. And then what I wanted to do was I wanted to break down my group into a few people here and there in geographical areas across the state, so that if, say, you had a sighting in Bemidji or Carl or up by Jay Cook State Park, there would be people with our group that would be in that area that would be willing to investigate it. And then we could give them a little schooling and what to look for and how to measure and take pictures and that kind of thing, and get them there in a more timely fashion so that we could catch those footprints and maybe catch an odor or an actual picture. That would be great, because Bigfoot does tend to hang in the areas, I think, for a little while, but he ain't going to stay there for very long. I think they move around quite a bit. But as far as the sightings go, I had one lady reached out to me a long time ago, and the sightings always been in the back of my mind. And she was one of the first ladies that reached out to me. And what made this sighting interesting was it was in southern Minnesota, down in the Minnesota River Valley. And she was a kid, and she grew up on a dairy farm, and her and her brothers and sisters were going out to milk cows and stuff. And this was just a typical routine, typical day. Well, one of their cows wasn't coming in. So the dad said, hey, we got to go out and try to get this cow, get it back into the barn to be milked. And the way the cow was bellowing, or however you call it, he thought there was something possibly wrong with the cow. So him, her, and her brother, I think, walked out there to the cow. Well, on their way walking across the pasture to go take a look at this cow, she felt like, she said, something was watching. They felt like something was watching them. And up until she had the encounter, every once in a while they would smell a weird musky odor. And she said it always bothered them, but they just thought it was a dead animal or something. And she said, so here they are, they're walking off to get this cow. And she said she felt like something was watching her. And then she said they got about out to the cow, and her dad was checking out the cow, and her brother was helping her dad. And when she turned around and was just, as a kid, I think her age was around 10 or something, 10 or 12. She was just looking around the pasture. She saw what she described as a huge man-like thing standing on the edge of the field, right in the tree line, staring at her, watching her. And she just kind of looked at it, and she said, wow. And it was white. That's what really blew me away. It was white. So it blended in. And she said it was really big. And so she said they took care of the cow, and as they were walking back, she was afraid to say something to her dad, but she said, Dad, there's something over there. And when they looked over there, it was still standing there watching them. And then she says, as they got closer to the barn, it slowly backed up and disappeared off into the woods. And she said she never did find out what it was, but she said every once in a while they'd see big footprints out there. But she said it was weird because she said it was all hairy and totally white except for its eyes. And she said its face seemed a little bit darker, but the eyes and everything were the only thing that was different. And she said it watched them the whole time they walked across that field. And I thought, wow. And she said it shook her up. And then she reported it to us. Gosh, that must have happened 60 years ago or 70 years ago or something, when she was a kid. So it stuck with her in her memory that her whole life. And she had always wanted to know what it was. And it was funny because when she contacted me, she didn't know. She's not one of these ladies that watches a lot of TV or anything like that. So she really didn't have a great understanding of what Bigfoot was. And it was kind of funny because she reached out to me and she goes, I don't know. She goes, you're going to think I'm crazy, but I want to tell you this story of when I was a kid. And she goes, what do you think it could have been? Do you think it could have been a bear or do you think it really could have been a Bigfoot? And I said, wow. I said, after she told me the story, and I'm looking at the area that she's seen it in, I'm thinking, well, it can't be a bear down there, I wouldn't think. I said, but it really resonated that that's what it was. And it's those kind of stories that really keep me going because there's so many voices and so many people trying to get into the game, I guess, so to speak. It keeps you seeking those honest stories. And then Some of the stories come to me at the really oddest times. I wish people would actually email them to me, like, through the group. And half the stories I get are actually when I'm out and about. I was at a garage sale one time. I met a lady there that was from Washington State, and she grew up in Minnesota. But when she got older, she got married, and her husband, they raised a family out in Washington State. And she lived by Spokane. And she was telling me, and it was funny because when I first started talking to her, she was telling me how she was from Washington. And I was telling her, I said, well, my daughter lives in Washington. And that's how we kind of got to talking. And she knew the lady at the garage sale. Anyhow, we got to talking, and I was just joking around with her. And I said, hey, did you ever see any Bigfoots while you were out there? And she looked at me and she got real serious and she scowled at me. She goes, oh, that stuff's nonsense. She goes, there's no Bigfoots. And she walked away. So I didn't think anything more about it. And I seen her up later on at the register, checking out her garage sale items. And I was commenting about her items because I knew the lady that was having the garage sale. So I was just there to small talk while my wife shot. And I looked at her and I go, I didn't mean to upset you by that. I said, I have a Bigfoot group, Minnesota Bigfoot sightings. And I said, when I heard you were from Washington, I just took a gamble that you might have heard something or whatever. So she starts walking towards her car, and I was talking to her, and she looks at me. She goes, well, I don't like to talk about it. But she goes, there was a time. And she goes, we were berry picking huckleberries. And she goes, we were up in this area. And she told me where it was. And I can't remember off the top of my head, but it was a national forest area outside of Spokane. And she had been there many times before. And she said, there's bear in there. So you got to use caution when you're picking the berries because the bears come in to get them when they're ripe. So her and her daughters and her husband were out there picking berries. Well, she was walking along picking berries and not paying attention to where they were at. And when she looked around, they were gone. She had gotten a little further down the trail from them. And so she was going to finish filling up her bucket. And then she was going to go back and, meet with them and go back to the car or whatever. Well, as she was finishing up filling her bucket, she smelt this like pungent odor. And then she heard like a snap of a branch, and she thought it was a bear. And she said, so right away, she's thinking it's going to be a bear, and she's going to yell at it and scare the bear away. Like, when she's backing up from the bush, she said it wasn't a bear. She said, but it was huge. And she said it was about 7 or 8 foot tall. And she said it was eating the berries. And she said it came out into the clearing where she was at, and it looked at her. She looked at it, and she said it freaked out and ran back into the patch. And she said she hightailed it the other way to her husband. And she said she felt like such an idiot because she didn't want to believe what she had seen because she said people would make fun of her, and she didn't want to be like that. And then she told me, she goes, and she looked at me, she goes, I suppose, she goes, if you want to and you want to tell your members about it, you can. I just don't want my name mentioned, she said. And I said, okay.
I think it's just a bit of a psychological barrier that she built a little bit to protect herself. We were just talking about this on Joe's show, that how oftentimes do you hear people that say, well, I was out in the woods and this happened, and they're going through the whole thing, and this was thrown at me, or I seen this or that. And then they say, now I'm not saying this was Bigfoot. It's like they want to protect themselves from the reality of thinking, could it have been? Because that means they're going to slip into insanity here, right?
Or they don't want to believe it themselves because they think that it's not accepted or whatever. So they know what happened. They know something happened, and they don't want to fully acknowledge it, but yet they want to because they want to talk about it to see what you think it could be. But it was funny because as I walked back to the car with her, she told me that her brother lives up by I want to say he lives up by Brainerd, but I might have that wrong. He has a cabin up there, and he had a sighting. And she said it really scared him to the point where he doesn't even hunt anymore. He used to go deer hunting all the time up at his cabin. And he said one day he was up there, and he said that his cabin sits back off the road. And it's in one of the national forest or something. I can't remember, but it's on a forest road. And it sits back off the road. And he was getting ready to do something. I don't know if he was getting ready to leave to go somewhere or whatever, but he went to walk out his front porch, and he looked up, and there was something. He said he was huge, and it was bipedal, and it was walking across his front yard. And he said it's not a really big clearing. It's like maybe 50 feet or 75 feet or something, but it walked across that clearing, and it stopped. and it realized that he was there, and it looked at him. He looked at it, and he said, whatever it was, it kind of acted confused, and it ran off in the woods and disappeared. And he said it scared the bejesus out of him, and he said he hasn't been out there hunting since. And he said he doesn't like going to the cabin anymore because he's scared. And then we had a cop one time. I think that was from Wisconsin, or it might have been Michigan. And they got called out to a lady's house, and they were laughing about it. And it's actually, you can go on the internet and search it up. I think the 911 thing is out there somewhere, but he was telling me they thought it was funny. They thought the lady was nuts, and they went out to her house and they seen all these footprints in her yard, and they're like, what the heck? Mm-hmm. And then they seen it in her backyard going deep, going into the woods off of her yard light. And this lady kept saying she reported it as somebody peeping on her windows. And she said the person was 7 or 8 foot tall because of how high her windows sat up. Yeah. And the kids were laughing about it, and they thought, oh, she's crazy.
I've heard that one before. It's funny crazy how there's certain areas that I think about, like what you had brought up, like the BFRO, and when they go to do a TV show in a town, they have their town hall meeting, right? Yeah. And they go in, and the first thing they ask is, how many in here has had an encounter with Bigfoot, right? Yeah. And their hands just shoot up, right? Because these people know they're in a safe place, right? Nobody's going to shun them for raising their hand. What's interesting is if you took all those people and put them in a restaurant with 50 other people, just random people, and you walked into a restaurant, not a town hall BFRO meeting, and you walked into a restaurant with 100 people and said, how many in here have an encounter with Bigfoot? Not one hand will go up, because they're all looking at each other first, right? They're like, I'm not going to be the first dude in here to raise my hand. I'll raise it if 5 other people do. And I think that's what you saw with the lady from Washington. She's at a rummage sale. She's not sure who these people are, who's believers, who's not believers, who's going to shun her, who's not. And you ask somebody that question in an uncontrolled atmosphere, have you ever had anything happen, an encounter? You're likely to get a no.
That's true.
And then in the parking lot, away from everybody, they're going to say, hey, come over here. I got something to tell you. Because people just don't want to be that first hand in the restaurant to say, I did, and have everybody staring at them going, what?
I think that was one of my mistakes I made with my group. I think I tried to be investigative. What's the word I'm looking for? To try to break the sightings down to see if they're real or not. Mm-hmm. And I think versus just letting people tell their stories for what they are and not try to decipher if it's real or not. I'm too much of an investigative mind, always looking for that, this might be real. But the stories I get told, they're so believable, and the people are so honest when they tell them. There's got to be something to it. So I think
that's why we prefer to be told about these things in an email,
right?
Because when you're getting ready to type it into a group, you're like, oh man, how many people are going to see? I mean, you're thinking all this as you're typing it, right? In an email, I'm sending it to Bill Butcher, and Bill Butcher's going to read it. Not 100 people, not 1,000 people.
That's
just
true.
Bill it. And so I think people tend to open up. They tend to recall more. They tend to use better descriptives because they're not preoccupied with the whole, man, I'm going to be under a microscope by 1,000 people if I click enter and put this on Facebook, right?
Exactly. And I've been so busy trying to break things down to try to find that real one that I'm missing the fact that it's supposed to be for everybody to report their stuff, or, not to always be breaking them down all the time. And that's a difficult thing for me. My brain just doesn't work that way, but I'm trying. But I will say another story I had that was very interesting was in Washington State as well. And there was a guy I met at a gas station. We had to go there to shower when we were camping in Idaho. And the campgrounds there don't have showers, so you have to go to a gas station. Needless to say, we had to drive like 40 miles to go there to take a shower. But I was sitting there talking to the guy, and I found out he was from Washington State, and he had a Bigfoot hat on. And I go, "Hey, I like your hat." And he goes, "Oh my God." He goes, "You're not going to rib me too, are you?" And I said, "No." I said,
no, I was wondering where I could buy one, right?
So yeah, so he goes, I go, "Is there a story with the hat?" And he goes, "Oh yeah." He goes, "Me and my dad were fishing, and I can't remember the name of the lake, but it was in Washington State near the Idaho border. And they were fishing, and they seen something on the shoreline. When they came around the bend, there it was." And he said it was huge, right at wading in the water, and it looked at them. They looked at it, and he said it freaked out, and it ran up the shoreline. And then he said a little while later, it was throwing rocks at their boat. And he says the only thing they could to get from it was that he was trying to shoo them away from that shoreline because it wanted whatever was there. But he said it scared the daylights out of him. And he says, and he became a believer right after that happened. But then I had another story. A friend of mine, she had just moved to Seattle, to Marysville, and she was on her way coming back from work. And I don't know if you've ever been out to Seattle, but if you've ever seen the I-5, that is just a nut freeway. I mean, it's nonstop all the time. Well, there was something that crossed the freeway, and it actually stopped. It's one of the few times the traffic actually stopped. And whatever it was came down one of them big embankments, came out of a subdivision, came down one of the embankments, crossed all the 6 or 7, 8 lanes of traffic. And they even had cops showing up because they thought it was a home break-in at first, because a lady had reported that somebody was looking in her windows. And then it come to find out that that's not what it was at all. It was actually a Bigfoot, and all these people had seen it cross the road, went up an embankment, and gone. It was just crazy. Yeah.
You know, we could probably sit here and this would be a great.
It's been fun, and I've had a lot of experiences.
just stories. I mean, but I appreciate you coming on, Bill. It was really a fun show, and I think that
anytime.
Well, we'll have you on again. I think that we should do. And you know, you're in my neck of the woods. I'd love to meet you and get together sometime. And you know, I think that you are on to something with the group. The way that you created the group, the way that it's fairly localized, let's say. When you're trying to find that fresh encounter that you could go try to derive data from by visiting a site, not a year after it happened, but within a few days.
Right.
I think that, you know, it's not something you're going to hear about every day on the site, but I think that you've created an opportunity where even if somebody came on and said, I heard a guy in my town was just talking about how you had an encounter 2 days ago, at least you've got a place to start. You could message that person and you know, is this somebody that would be willing to talk to me? Things like that.
Right. And I know the people are out there because I've ran into them. I mean, I ran into one lady one time at a store telling me about an encounter she had in Iowa. And I thought, wow, her and her husband were driving home one night, and they were going down this old farm road, and there was something came out from behind a barn, and it scared the heck out of them. I mean, the sightings are out there. Just some people, they don't want to be ridiculed for making them public, I guess. But
yeah. So John says he liked Bill's site on Facebook. I encourage everybody to do that. It's Minnesota Bigfoot sightings, right?
Yes, sir. And you're welcome to share on there. And we just try to keep it real friendly, real family orientated. And you can share your experiences, hear other people's. I post videos every once in a while, and I'll post pictures if I think they're, you know, something worthwhile to look at or may be interesting. Kind of let the people in the group decide whether or not they think it's legitimate or a hoax or whatever. I used to try to debunk everything, and I figured out that might be scaring people away from telling their stories. So I figure it's better not to be so debunking everything and just let them stand for what they are.
Yeah.
But
yeah, you know,
if there's so many
the best vetting that's going to occur is by our peers. It's just people need to be respectful. And I think from an administrative point of view, that's really your role there, is to make sure that it's okay to ask questions. It's okay to ask for clarification. It's not okay to come out and do it in a way that is, you know, we can disagree without it being ugly. I don't know why everybody's ability to do that got shot down the toilet here once these groups started emerging.
Everybody's a skeptic until it happens to them.
Well, and I think that there's a healthy level of skepticism, and then there's a look, I don't have to break you down to make me feel better. You know what I mean?
I mean, I had some people from up by Jay Cook State Park. I'm trying to think of the town, Carlton. I think I got that right.
Yeah.
And they are from the reservation up there. And this one lovely young lady and her boyfriend had seen a sighting. They were at their mom's house. He went outside to have a cigarette. And as he was having a cigarette, he was sitting in the car. It was a little cold out. I think it was late fall, early winter. It was kind of chilly. So he was lighting a cigarette in his car. And he just so happened to look up, and there crossing the field was a Bigfoot right out there by the tree line. The kid got so scared, he ran into the house to get his girlfriend to protect him. She looked out there, and she's like, oh, my gosh. And she was a Ojibwe, I think, Ojibwe. And she said their stories, they had always believed that he was like a guardian of the woods type of thing, or a mix of a spiritual and a physical. And she thought that was very interesting, and she told her grandmother about it. And her grandmother was like, yeah, that they're around here all the time. And it was funny because just now, a month after she had that sighting, we've had 3 or 4 more in that same exact area. It's just fascinating. And
well, the Jay Cook State Park, the Jay Cook State Park has had a number of sightings over the last couple decades. I mean,
that's an amazing area too.
I think the BFRO just added one just within the last 2 weeks that occurred in the Jay Cook State Park.
I think so, yeah. And I had a report. A lady was driving on the road and saw one. I think it's Highway 18, if I remember right, crossing the road up there. I met a lady when I was up on the North Shore. Her and her husband were agate hunting up there, and she had told me that there was a one of the forest roads up there by the Trestle Inn, I think it was. They were up there driving around, and they saw one cross the road up there right before dark. And then she was telling me a story about some guys in the military or National Guard or something were up there, or maybe it might have been police. Somebody thought their house got broken into, and then when they got there, they looked around and they could hear chatter, but they couldn't figure out what it was. And then when they looked up on the other side of the fenced-in area where the cameras don't quite reach, and there was the lighting kind of drops off, they saw a large shadowy figure disappear into the trees, and they heard a howl afterwards. So, wow. Yeah.
Well, let's plan on having you back on here this spring, and we'll talk about.
I wanted to ask you, how was your research going? I remember we had talked about your research and stuff. I just was curious how that was working out. Did you get any good results from that? It was really going good there.
The idea was, I mean, it was a different approach. We weren't using electronics. We weren't trying to get pictures. We were trying to create opportunities by leveraging maybe its curiosity to try to get it to interact and leave either hair samples or skin oil samples, some type of testable.
The idea was fascinating, I thought.
We collected some samples. They are being tested. The idea was to include them in the, kind of the Legend Meets Science 2 when it comes out. But Legend Meets Science 2 documentary that Doug's working on has actually expanded quite a bit as far as what they'd originally planned on making the documentary about, and all the different things that they're including in it. The study of a human being able to make infrasound, and all these different I should say components that were going to be included in that has been evolving. The production is taking a little longer because of that, but
I was waiting for that to come out.
Yeah, it'll be exciting when it does. It's just, it's such a big deal. It's such a big project that
And Doug's the guy.
it's not like going to one location and shooting a
No.
month's worth of footage and editing it down. It's all these different things that they were going to include in it. And each one is like its own little documentary that you have to condense to put into one 2-hour full feature documentary. That it's not an overnight project. It's not even, I think last spring it was like, boy, it'd be nice if we could have it done, by the end of 2022. And now it's like, man, I hope we have it done mid next year. I mean, it just, it keeps
Doug's
evolving.
the guy, though. Doug does a lot of great research on that stuff. He's the guy.
Yeah,
but his thing on infrasound, and you were talking about photography before in the trail cams and stuff. That's interesting. I watched a guy. It's not Bigfoot related, but I watched a guy that films animals with trail cams, and I learned from watching him filming those that most of the animals are aware of those cameras. I don't know. I think they can see. I don't know if they see infrared or what they see, but I even saw on those trail cams where some deer won't even come into them until they get comfortable, till other deer come in, and then they come in. I've seen a bear come in, eat the food, never even look at the camera, but the whole time he knew it was there, because when he went to leave, he reached up and licked the camera before he left, so he knew it was there the whole time. It's just unbelievable.
When I put game cameras on an area that I am putting corn out in or whatnot, trying to create an interest in an area, I don't do it during hunting season. I don't want to hunt over a baited area. Some states that's legal. I don't tend to do that. But one thing I'll notice is when one deer comes in, very skittish. I mean, that first image, that first IR flash, they run away. As soon as the video kicks on, they're running away, and they kind of do a tight 20-foot circle, and they try to mosey him back. But once you get 3 or 4 does there, you can get video after video after video. It's almost like this mentality that, well, if they're not running away, I'm not going to run away.
There's something there. I don't know what it is.
You realize that they can sense it, but they can become comfortable with it.
Right. I just noticed that they know it's there, because I've seen, and raccoons don't seem to care one way or the other.
No. And
yeah, I have to tell you, I love your site, by the way. I love your YouTube page. That intro was phenomenal.
Appreciate
Very
that.
nice.
I think some of the most fascinating game cam pictures that you get aren't pictures of full in frame what people are proposing to be Sasquatch. The most intriguing ones to me are when you see an arm in front of it with hair hanging off it. I've got a picture off of one of my game cameras that I'll share. It actually came from a game camera out in the Black Hills, on the edge of a big wheat field where it climbs in elevation. It's like right on the northern edge of the hills.
Huh.
And it was a gated area. I know we do some antelope hunting out there. Big, huge steel gate. There is an arm that you can clearly see is an arm and an elbow hanging with hair hanging about 8 to 10 inches off of this arm. What it is, I don't know. I mean, it could be somebody there with a wig or something, trying to, but it's just unlikely. I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm just saying it's unlikely that that's the case. It's not it's not the neck of an elk showing the that nape hair hanging down. It's clearly an arm there.
There's one on my site like that, and we still to this day cannot figure out what the heck it is. Consensus says it has to be a Sasquatch, but it's just so bizarre, and it's not. It's standing up facing you. It's bent over, but you can see the back of the foot, and it's like unbelievable. You can tell the foot is just really big in the proportion of the camera. And I've talked to the guy that filmed it and stuff, and he seems like he's legitimate. So just 2 old guys out putting up cameras for their hunting.
Yep. Well, again, Bill, thanks for joining us tonight. If you want to stay backstage, I'll talk to you for a moment here before I let you go after I land this plane, but I'm going to pull you off the screen, and I will be back with you in a minute. Well, I appreciate you guys tuning in. We went a couple minutes over, not way over, but it's 10:10 Central Time. You guys have been great in chat tonight. A lot of great questions and a lot of great conversation going on. I try to keep up with it during the show. Sometimes I get a little bit distracted, but what a great guest. I don't, maybe you guys are like me. I could sit here for 2 hours from start to finish and listen. We could turn it on tomorrow night and I'll listen to 2 hours more of different encounters that Bill has had people share with him. I'm intrigued by all of them. Not to say I believe every encounter story that I hear, but I can't say that any of them aren't intriguing. But yeah, I appreciate you guys choosing Pine Island Research to spend your Monday night with us. We got Christmas coming up. I got a birthday coming up back on my Pine Island Research channel. I believe at some point during the end of the week, we'll have a little party. I know Bat Mom shares the same birthday as I do. And we might have some fun with that, but for sure next Monday night is going to be the day after Christmas, the 26th of December. The plan is to have a show just like we normally would. Might see some Christmas decorations in the background, who knows, but I encourage you all to find the joy here this week as we lead into Christmas. It's easy to get frustrated with the lack of parking spaces at the mall and all that kind of stuff, but keep your eye on the prize, find the joy, and travel safe if you're traveling and visiting family. Appreciate you all. We will see you next week, Monday night.